Hello, welcome to the Brookbanks podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wakeling, Head of Cost and Commercial here at Brookbanks, and I'm very pleased to have with me today Danny Lloyd-Jones, Associate Utilities Director at Brookbanks, Jack Kenny, Associate Director in the M&E team at Brookbanks, and we're very pleased to have with us today Guy Kippen, who is Associate Development Director at Prime. And we're going to be talking today about healthcare development. But before we get into that, I'll just ask each of our guests just to give us a brief overview of who they are and how they've got here. So we'll start with you, Danny. Over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks very much, Ben. Welcome all. Yeah, as I say, I'm Danny Lloyd-Jones. I'm the Associate Utilities Director here at Brookbanks. I've been within the business it'll be 4 years in February. My journey into utility infrastructure started with a graduate development scheme some years ago, probably 12, 13 years ago. And ever since I've been involved with, I suppose, in particular, electricity, gas, potable water, and telecoms. And that's ranged from residential developments to commercial to data centres. So yeah, a good broad range of experience as well as some elements of commercial experience over the years as well.
Lovely stuff. Jack, we'll go to you next.
Thanks, Ben. Hello, everyone. So, Jack Kenny, Associate Director here at Brookbanks, and my sort of introduction into healthcare and into engineering started with an apprenticeship around 10 years ago now. And the business that I undertook it with had a very sort of strong arm into healthcare, notably primary healthcare developments, and then in future sort of opportunities came along to work alongside trusts and NHS estates. So that's where sort of my experience comes from.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jack. Right, Guy, guest of honor, over to you. Tell us a bit about yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I'm Guy Kippen, as Ben says, an Associate Development Director here at Prime Developments. I've been here getting on for 10 years, and by background, it's a bit different into the development industry. I've actually come from a town planning background, so I'm a chartered town planner, and sort of bring a strategic view and planning view into the development.
Excellent. So, tell us a bit then, Guy, about what Prime Developments do and your development model.
Yeah, so we are, and we pride ourselves on being the UK's leading health and care specialist property developer, which involves also investment management and also asset management and operations. We've been going for almost 30 years now as an industry, in the industry, and started off doing purely health and care projects. We've expanded now to cover the whole health and care sector. So anything related to health or health infrastructure, we look at and deliver for our partners. Our model is based on that whole package. So we look to be the partner to the clients, whether that's NHS or private health or anything connected. And we'll deliver everything required to bring forward projects that could be overcoming commercial pressures, commercial issues, and financial barriers. So we have a different mechanism depending on each project to bring that finance into the projects if that's what's required.
So you go right through from identifying the land and unlocking it, right through to investment,
Yeah.
development, actually building
Yeah.
hospitals.
Yeah.
Presumably, it's not just hospitals as well. If it's everything in the healthcare
Yeah.
sector, it's
Correct.
other buildings as well.
Yes. So
So care worker dwellings, that kind of thing.
yes. Yeah. And like I said, we'll quite often be talking to someone or approached by a trust or an organisation who will have a problem, and we'll then help them right from that word go in finding a solution to that problem, and then see it all the way through construction right to the end until they've got that building that they're able to use. Yes, and like you said, it can include residential as well. So we've recently launched a sister company called Hive by Prime, which is a residential building operator focused upon delivering affordable and desirable housing for key workers, especially those who work within the NHS.
Ah, fabulous. That sounds really good. So, what kind of, and I will come to you, Danny and Jack, in a minute. Sorry, I'm really really firing questions at Guy at the moment. But It is really interesting. You mentioned that trusts will come to you with problems. I
Yeah.
mean, what kind of problems do you tend to find,
Um,
and how are they overcome?
Quite often, and trusts will come to us with sort of an issue that their clinical demands outstrip their current estate, or there's blockers in the way. So we go for a master plan led approach where we possibly can, and kind of look at everything that they need to consider holistically, and then bring forward projects from within that master plan and making sure that they are sound and deliverable. So a really good example where we've managed to achieve that is down in Southampton, where we've got a partnership in place with the trust there, and we've, through that master planned approach, identified actually certain hospital services which can be taken off site, which then frees up um, some of that important estate that they've got already existing to be used for frontline clinical services. So, for example, at Southampton, we've got a off-site staff park and ride facility, which is used Monday to Friday by the hospital, and then at weekends it's in partnership with the council as well. And also there, we've recently delivered a sterile services department and aseptic pharmacy, because they're critical departments to the hospital, but they don't necessarily need to be front and centre.
So a lot of your work, I guess, will be on existing hospitals and
Correct.
existing structures, and then kind of improving them and expanding them and
Yeah,
so on.
yeah.
So, Dan, if we come to you first, then, thinking about that, what kind of utilities challenges do you have if a trust is looking to upgrade an existing property or existing asset?
Yes, I suppose the difficulties that you can have is that there's, as we're all aware, there's a very constricted network as it is in terms of electricity capacity in particular. So with trust sites, obviously they have relatively high demands. And obviously, with them being operational 24/7, you have to think about kind of resilience as well on a particular network. So, network upgrades. What you will find is that often the sites are relatively busy in terms of existing utilities. So it's not only having the power availability, it's actually kind of spacing for either rerouting additional cables or pipes for the additional demand to the building. So there's quite a bit to consider when it comes to network upgrades.
And I suppose it's considering how you would upgrade networks and expand them and so on without actually affecting the existing function of the hospital or the care facility or whatever it is. The last thing you want is utilities to suddenly be cut off. Um,
Correct.
and presumably, Guy, when thinking about things like expansions and utility upgrades and so on, you would need to make sure that your communications with the staff, the patients, any other stakeholders involved is pretty sharp, I'm presuming.
Yes, definitely is. So we make sure that on all our projects we've got a good comm strategy in place, both as you'd expect, sort of due the planning process, and keeping them informed of that, and then also once it's in construction with our contractors, making sure that phasing plans are in place so that everyone's aware of what's happening and when and why as well. Because
Do you,
it's really easier to
no,
get
sorry.
them to engage, understand what the why. Um, that really helps get that message across as well.
And do you find you get much challenge or opposition from kind of local residents and so on, or is that really if you're talking about healthcare and expansion of existing hospitals and so on, I suppose quite as it's not quite as spiky for local residents as perhaps a new housing development might be.
It does vary project by project. But yes, you're right. In the main, um, healthcare should be seen more favourably. Obviously, we are talking about hospitals in built-up areas, as Danny said. So they're surrounded by people's homes, and we're still doing live building projects around people's homes. So we do have to make sure that we're not impacting upon them.
Thank you. Excellent. So, Jack, coming to you then, thinking about your role in the M&E team, what kind of challenges do you find in either creating new care facilities or expanding existing ones?
Yeah, there's a few challenges that come along with sort of projects of that nature. Danny alluded to them a little bit on his section around the utilities. I think we'll sort of go down the existing route first. We have to coordinate and usually extend existing services, so heating, ventilation, electrical power, fire alarm, things of that nature. And it's the complexities of operating in a live hospital, really, while a lot of the clinical functions around what we're doing need to be maintained and need to be operational. And the sort of complexities then of not only designing it, then how do you do it, and the sort of level of risk and the assessments that go along the way, so that the contractor to come in and undertake these works. Then into a sort of which, funny enough, on healthcare projects is usually a little bit easier, is when you're building new stuff, or new development, shall we say. The complexities there, which are also in an existing development, but it's more around the sort of regulatory compliance and looking at the HTMs, which are health technical memorandums, and HBNs, which are health building notes, and ensuring that we sort of, I don't really want to say tick the boxes, but ensuring that we're designing in line with the guidance. The sort of authorising engineers from the trust and the estates teams are happy with what we're doing, and are happy to sign that off when it comes to that sort of section of the project. Alongside that, then I think, yeah, this is sort of the chaps have alluded. You can find some trusts and some estates that are very happy to enable these things, and you can find some that sometimes are happy that you're there to do things, but sort of want to make sure that the correct channels have gone through and the correct people have been notified. And as Guy sort of alluded to, in terms of communications, that the right people are on calls, and the right people are on email trails, and the right people are being fed information, so that these things can run smoothly.
You mentioned there about regulatory compliance. I mean, I've come from a house building background, and so latest building regs have always got knock-on effects on cost and design, thinking about things like future home standard and Part L and all that kind of thing. Um, Sticking with you, Jack, in the first instance, what kind of regulatory changes do you see in this sector? And does it present particular problems when you're expanding existing assets? If you've got a hospital that you then need to upgrade to meet new regulations, that must be quite tricky, I should imagine.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we sort of, building regs are always there for all projects, of course, and then, as I sort of mentioned before, HTM. So one specific to us in the building services M&E world would be those of sort of HTMO3, which is ventilation in healthcare premises. We've got HTMO2, which is medical gases, HTMO4, which is related to water, HTMO5, which is fire safety, fire engineering, and then finally HTMO6, which is electrical services. So in terms of regulatory compliance, we sort of need to demonstrate that these guides and standards are forming the principles of our design. And then in terms of, if we look further afield into sort of building regs, it can cause issues when you're especially working on existing developments that could be 20, 30, 40 years old, and their sort of current construction maker isn't to current building regs. And there's some sort of dispensation that you can get along the way, but it does add to the complexity of what we're doing when we have to think of the fabric, when we have to think of sort of current U values for walls and roofs and ceilings and floors, and G values for windows and things. So I mean, the thing about healthcare for me as an M&E engineer, it's always, for us, the more complex projects, because of the nature of all of the regulations and guides and standards that we have to comply with and have to juggle and work out the best way that we can make schemes viable, from a design perspective, but also from a cost perspective. You know, we know it's no surprise to anyone listening to the podcast that a lot of trusts up and down the country, are under pressure to deliver upgrades and to deliver the best clinical care they can. But sometimes that comes with a cost, and costs are always, from my experience, something that is very difficult for trusts to navigate.
Jack, it's also the decarbonising, isn't there, within the NHS? There's a big push on that at the
Yeah,
moment, and how they deliver decarbonisation strategies, like you said, to existing buildings,
mm,
is quite challenging.
yeah, it is, and I mean, Danny will probably have his thoughts on this. To sort of give people the gist of decarbonisation, it's taking gas out of buildings and replacing sort of gas heating and gas hot water systems with electric. So, in principle, sounds fantastic, and we all sort of do our best to get to that point. But you know, we already know how constrained networks are, and all of a sudden you're taking 100 kilowatts of heating off a gas network and sticking it onto the electrical infrastructure while at the same time building something new or extending something, and that itself comes with its own power requirements.
Danny, have you anything to add on that with what we
Yeah,
talked
no,
about?
it's a good point to mention. So yeah, the increase in power requirements as well. So as I kind of briefly mentioned earlier, it's you have to think about this kind of spatial constraints within the healthcare sites. So there's normally a bit of a boundary between kind of statutory provider and statutory infrastructure as well as private infrastructure. So NHS sites will quite typically they will have their statutory connections into the main buildings, but however, kind of dog-legged on top of those, there are quite a lot of private networks. Now, these can range from, adaptive electricity supplies. There can be additional gas supplies, water, as well as telecoms. Some of the issues that you have with that is that when it's a statutory connection, that is, as any part of an initial search that we do at Brookbanks, and I'm sure others do the same, when we get statutory records, we get an understanding of what the site looks like, its makeup, and where the existing networks are. When it comes to private networks, they're not indicated in any kind of statutory plans. So you're heavily reliant on having to do kind of ground penetrating radar surveys or trial excavations to actually understand what the makeup of the site looks like. Because if we're looking at upgrading a site or there's an increase in power requirements, it's how we can actually route the utilities to the prescribed building or the new proposed building. It can become very, very daunting in terms of understanding what you actually have available on site. I know obviously from dealing with Prime and Guy in particular over the years when we've looked at multi-story car parks, the overflow scenario of looking for an additional building on an already congested site is very, very difficult. And that all boils back into that kind of continuation of supply which you need to maintain at all times. And as I said briefly before, it's the resilience of the network. It's a 24/7 operation providing pivotal and essential care. There can't be any lapses in network resilience. So the strategies have to be there to make sure that you have a really robust infrastructure strategy for the site, as well as trying to make space and understand what that looks like for any kind of future expansion. I think that's something else that kind of comes onto the point of, net zero and the removal of gas, etc. I think what might be quite difficult for private healthcare in particular is how they can forecast for the future. It's all well and good looking at a kind of a retrofit build for the next kind of 3 to 5 years, but what happens in excess of that? We all know that the NHS is under increasing pressure, so there's always going to be a difficult balance between how we can accurately forecast what loads are required for the developments. What you don't want to do is overestimate and create additional stress on the network, and that could also increase in the number of substations or trying to upgrade existing substations where we have some issues with the size and capabilities of doing that as well. So there's quite a lot to consider in terms of network upgrades.
It's a very fine balancing act, isn't it, Danny? Because as you say, you don't want to ask for too much,
No.
you don't want to ask for too little,
Yeah.
because both come with different types of issues, and yeah, I think that's where sort of part of our sort of connection together helps, because our part of our remit is to assist the utilities guys with helping understand how much power that building or that development or that extension is going to need, how we can diversify slightly to ensure that we're not asking for too much, as Danny says, so we're not asking for upgrades that aren't required or bringing plans forward that maybe could have waited till the next financial year when some of the sort of pot of money is topped up again. So it's a very, very fine balancing act, and I think it requires a lot of close collaboration really between the design team, and not sort of leaving it to one person or leaving it to one sector of the team to say, well, you're the electrical engineer, sort out the power, or you're the utilities consultant, sort the water out. It very much needs to be a conversation and a team decision with the trust on board with the plan. of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, PAR test is a big one on that, I find at the moment, Jack, with EV car charging,
Yeah,
because we've got PAR tests as the requirements in there, and then quite a lot of local authorities now are imposing planning requirements around it, which are quite often in excess. And then you link that back into the energy requirements that come from that, and suddenly, yeah, you're having to put in infrastructure for, in effect, 100% EV in some local authority areas, knowing that full well that the uptake on EVs and the requirement for EV charging at hospitals is quite low compared to national averages, because it's not at the front of people's minds when they're visiting hospitals. But yeah, it's an added burden we have to add onto the projects.
yeah, definitely. And as you say, it's for sites of that nature where the uptake's low, it's almost reserving power that's never going to be
Yeah,
used really, and then essentially putting constraints on other areas of the network and almost delaying development and extension of other parts of the hospital, or part of the estate that power's more effective and being used more effectively. And as you say, Guy, a lot of people are turning up to hospital to visit loved ones who are having care. They're not really turning up to stick their EV on
correct.
to
Yeah,
charge it. That's more of a pop down the road to Costa sort of thing, and pop in and have a coffee and get some electricity into the car. Whereas, going to hospital, we've all done it. You jump straight out of the car and you head straight to the
you
ward to
do.
see your loved
Yeah,
one, don't you?
you want to get in and out
Well,
and worry about the car later.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, the car park charges are high enough as it is. The last thing you want is to stick your car on into an EV charging point and have to pay more. But yeah, it's a good point. Thank you. I was going to raise about future proofing and how you kind of walk that fine line between making sure that you're not going back into an existing property every 2 years to upgrade it, but also not um, trying to forecast something that may not happen. I mean, emerging technologies um, crop up all the time, and it's just trying to figure out in the future which of those are going to be used in your assets. Um, are there any uh, challenges, Guy, with around NHS and around obviously the government involvement in NHS and funding, anything like that, or is it really just no different between a private hospital, say, and an NHS?
No, it is. I think funding is the big one. The NHS has very tight budgets, and they have to use those budgets appropriately, and sparingly in some situations. And so, as Jack was saying, when you're looking at projects, whether that's refurbishment, refit, or new builds, they've got to fully justify every pound spent. Um, and quite often, those pounds don't go far enough to do some of the other things that are required. So that's where we can come in and assist with that, and look at things that can come forward without requiring um, centralised NHS funding. So our key worker offer through Hive is very much built around that. The idea that we will build it at, and source its funding and make it affordable, and we will operate the building and do it in a way that is affordable to key worker staff. So we're actually on site with one at the moment in Truro in Cornwall, and it's working on that model. And we've got one that's operational in Dorchester. And to assist in Somerset, we've just bought a building from the council, an existing building, which kind of links back into the carbon stuff we're just talking about as well, because we're taking an existing office building and going to convert that into
Hmm.
affordable key worker housing, because the NHS can't afford to deliver it. And if it could, it should be so far down its priority list because it needs to be focusing on the best possible healthcare spaces for
Yes,
its
I was
patients.
going. I was going to ask about that. I was going to move on to the housing
Yeah.
and the hive side of things, and one of my questions was whether you had to buy up pieces of greenfield land or brownfield land, or whether you do look at refurbing existing properties. And it sounds like you do a bit of both.
Yeah, we
Uh,
do. We do what we think is the right thing to do for each specific site or location, and also looking at what's available. Um, but key worker housing is definitely a gap that we want to support, because quite often these are people who are employed at the hospital, and can't necessarily stay in that area, because they can't afford somewhere decent to live. So we want to
mm,
make sure that we can give them that nice space, um, so that, yeah, when they leave work, they're going back to a nice home, as well as giving them decent quality space to work in.
Are there any special considerations on the staff housing that you need to consider um, based on the fact that they work in healthcare, they have quite stressful jobs? Do you need to give extra consideration to open spaces or places where they can relax and recuperate after what could be quite a stressful day, um, or am I overthinking that
No,
side of things?
again, it's site specific, but we try to make sure that we include decent, suitable outside spaces. So especially in the summer months, they've got somewhere they can go and use. Uh, they're more often than not, they're going to be communal gardens, but that's fine because it also then helps build that societal benefit to them as well, because they're all workers who then get to know their neighbours, which is really good.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Finally, from me, Jack, we talked previously, or very briefly, about Leighton Hospital. There was a bit of a case study there. Are there any key elements you wanted to pull out of that project?
Yeah, we can do. I think what's nice about Leighton is it sort of loops back into what we were talking about, that regulatory compliance and assisting the trusts with our sort of know-how and specialist sort of knowledge on building services systems in healthcare. So at Leighton, we do a service for the trust which we call quality monitoring. So we're not essentially the designer for their developments, but what we do is we sit alongside the trust and we act as their guardian. So we will review design drawings by others and have a look through them, make sure that they're compliant and that the design sort of has an outcome focused sort of tinge to it. And what I mean by that is we try and ensure that the outcome of what the trust is paying for is front and centre. So instead of designing systems to comply with the HTMs only, it's to try and help the designer and the engineers understand that yes, we have to comply with the regulations, of course, but how do we make it so that the staff can operate that new building more efficiently? How do we make it that the level of patient care is as high as it can be? And sort of how do we improve that sort of clinical care rather than just sticking in a HTM compliant AHU for the sake of it, or running into diverse power supplies for the sake of it. We then take that a step further as part of the quality monitoring, and when the contractor then is on site installing and building these extensions and new developments, we will then attend site sort of once a week or bi-weekly to snag and inspect and to sort of ensure that what has been put down on the paper is now being built, and what the trust has signed off for and what we have sort of recommended to them has been updated or changed or incorporated has been done so, and then we can keep a record of that, and we'll issue a sort of what we call a status and quality report following on each visit, just to ensure that snags are being picked up week to week, and as we say, the design is being installed as it is on the drawing. And then we'll end that then with some commissioning support at the end, so making sure that the systems are all up and running and working in the way that they're meant to, that the staff operate in the building understand how the new systems are working, and again, sort of through that whole process, that challenge of extending existing systems, is also something that we think about and try and help the trust and the contractor work through the complexities of doing so. So Leighton is a project we're currently on with the trust, and they're building a couple of wards that we're helping this process with them.
Right, yeah, it extends more to just putting in the pipes and wires. It's the golden thread of information and records and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. Not
that's
to
it. That's it.
not to distill what you do down to pipes and wires. Sorry, Jack. That's
I mean, you can probably distill it down to pipes and wires if you're looking for 3 words to describe M&E. So it's not too bad, Ben.
awesome. Thank you. So, thank you. If you wanted to get in touch with us, you can go to the Brookbanks website. That's brookbanks.com. You'll find more information about the services we provide, or a contact us page. But if anyone listening wanted to get in touch with any of our guests specifically, I will hand over to them. So, Danny, how can people best get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So if people wanted to get in touch with me, they can find my details on the company website, or if not, they can give me a call on my mobile, which is 07903 090 367, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.
Excellent. Jack, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. So yeah, as Danny says, company website will have our email addresses on if you need to get in touch, or LinkedIn. Always sort of if you want to get through to me on LinkedIn, I'll probably have a look at least once a day to see if there's any messages or stuff. So
Sounds good. Yeah, once a day is usually enough for LinkedIn, I find. And then
yeah, and me.
Guy, finally, over to you.
Yeah, likewise, you can find out about Prime at primeplc.com, and likewise, same as Jack, I'm also on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Guy. And look forward to seeing you again soon. And that's the end of another Brookbanks podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.